Very good afternoon to one and all present here. I am Dr. B. Deepalakshmi, Associate Professor, Department of ECE, Ramco Institute of Technology. I welcome you all to the webinar on the need for national education policy and the reforms in NEP 2020, jointly organized by RIT-ISTE Faculty Chapter and RIT-IQAC, Ramco Institute of Technology, Rajapalayam. This policy will surely help making India a knowledge superpower and improve Atmanirbhar Bharata. RIT has organized this webinar to make the stakeholders of the institute understand the NEP 2020 for effective implementation in future. We are happy to share with you all that we have the participants including academicians, researchers, students from various institutions and industry persons across the country being conducted through virtual platform on Google Meet, simultaneously being streamed link on YouTube. Today we have with us our Honorable Chief Guest, Dr.Shakila T Shamsu, formerly OSD, NEP, Secretary to the Committee of Draft NEP, Department of Higher Education, MHRD, New Delhi. It's my pleasure to deliver the welcome address on this wonderful occasion. First of all, I would like to thank our management for encouraging us to organize this one-day webinar on the need for national education policy and the reforms in NEP 2020, jointly organized by ISC Faculty Chapter and IQAC of Ramco Institute of Technology. I would like to extend my heartfelt welcome to our respected Chief Guest, Dr. Shakila T Shamsu, formerly OSD, NEP, Secretary to the Committee of Draft National Education Policy, Department of Higher Education, MHRD, New Delhi, for delivering this webinar about national education policy. I extend my warm welcome to our respected Principal, Dr. L. Ganesan, and Vice Principal, Dr. S. Rajakarunagaran, Professor and Head, Department of Mechanical Engineering, Ramco Institute of Technology. I would also like to welcome the conveners, Dr. S. Kannan, Professor and Head, Department of EEE, and Dr. P. Sudesh Kumar, Associate Professor, Department of Mechanical, Ramco Institute of Technology, and the heads of various departments. I extend my heartfelt welcome to all the participants from various engineering colleges, researchers, schools, and industry across the country to acquire knowledge about this NEP 2020 through this webinar. Hope this webinar will be an eye-opening session for all the participants. Thank you, one and all. Now, I would like to welcome Dr. V. Shivakumar, Associate Professor, Department of Mechanical Engineering, Ramco Institute of Technology, to introduce about our chief guest. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deepalakshmi madam. My voice is reachable. I
Yes,
hope
sir.
so. Yes, thank you. It's my immense pleasure to deliver a few words about our today's resource person, Dr. Shakila Shamsu, was formerly OSD in the Department of Higher Education, Ministry of Education. She has been the secretary to the Committee to Draft National Education Policy. She was also the nodal officer of the flagship Government of India scheme of National Mission on Teachers and Teaching. And during her tenure, 95 centers were approved for undertaking professional capacity building of faculty, and over 5 lakh faculty have been trained. New initiatives of Leadership for Academicians program, annual refresher program in teaching, and faculty induction programs were implemented during her tenure. Period to this, she held senior positions such as OSC in MOE and Joint Advisor in Planning Commission. Her core areas cover education planning and policy making, teacher education, ICT, and open and distance learning and inclusive education. Her academic career spans over 39 years in teaching and academics in the University of Mumbai and Indira Gandhi National Open University, and over 14 years in the Government of India. She holds a PhD in education, gold medalist for Masters of Political Science, PG diploma in distance education, and a degree in law. She has to her credit a number of articles in international journals, book contributions, and involved in the preparation of 11th and 12th plan and several government reports on education. She has been privileged to be a member of various committees of the Government of India, state governments, UGC, United States Indian Educational Foundation, National Selection Committee for Fulbright Fellowship, etc. She has addressed several national and international conferences within the country and UK, Australia, Thailand, Singapore, Malaysia, and Nepal. such a vast, experienced personality. I am very happy to welcome Madam. Please share the session. Thank you, Madam.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Dr. Shivakumar and Deepa Lakshmi, as well as the Principal, Dr. Ganeshan, Vice Principal, Raja Karunakaran, and conveners and coordinators from the RIT-ISTE in my own place, and that he would be happy if I could, and that is the reason why I thought even if it is a little delayed, that I would still deliver the address on the NEP, and it's a matter of great privilege that I share these thoughts with an engineering college located in Tamil Nadu, and I'm sure that you all are already receiving the NEP quite well. I think in the time that we have, and I look forward to some interaction with the faculty and the researchers also, I try to basically focus upon the recommendations of the National Education Policy 2020 with regard to higher education, though I would touch upon a few recommendations on school education also. Now, I think all of you have read through the draft of the committee, the draft report of the committee, which was a very voluminous document of about 484 pages, which was headed, the committee was headed by Dr. Kasturangan, and this was the report on the basis of which the National Education Policy 2020, which is a very crisp, small document, concise document of about 66 pages, was approved by the cabinet on 29th of July 2020, making it a very historic moment in the education policy making of this country. I'm sure all of you are aware that this, as a policy, this is the third policy, because you had the 1968 policy, which was based on the Kothari Commission report of 1966. Then you had the 86 policy, which was not really headed by any committee, but it was an internal exercise by the government. And this is the third comprehensive policy which looks at the entire sector, touching upon school education, higher education, professional education, adult education, vocational education, teacher education, and the whole cross-cutting themes of technology and so on. But as a policy, we must understand that though this is the third policy in the journey or the genesis of education policy making, as far as the 21st century is concerned, this is the first policy. And we are saying that we're talking about a policy in the 21st century. We must be seized of the reality that we are already 20 years into this current millennium. And policies do not happen very often. This policy of 2020 is likely to remain in force for another 20 to 25 years. You're aware that newspaper reports have quoted that this policy is coming almost after 34 years after the earlier policy. If you go by that same logic, then you might be able to say that this might be a policy which might last even up to 2050. That is good into the half of this particular century. The rationale, many people felt, why is there a need for a policy? And I think in a very short answer, I think all of us as faculty, as researchers, as students need to understand that policies are in response to changing needs and changing times. And if there is nothing wrong with the current, there is nothing, I would say, fundamentally wrong with the existing structures that are there within the system. But it is failing to deliver in the sense it is not preparing the students with the right kind of attitudes and skills. It is not empowering the teachers or the faculty. And it is not finally doing justice to the educational institutions, whether they are schools or whether they are technical institutions or whether they are ordinary higher education institutions. So policies are necessary with the changes that happen at the societal level, at the economic level, at the national level, and at the international level. So this NEP 2020 is basically responding to the technological changes, to the changes that are taking place, cutting edge research that has been taking place in science and technology, to the whole I would say, invasion of the information and communication technologies, as well as the fact that globally as a society, we are committed to the idea of sustainable development. And if we want our students, our educational institutions, and our faculty to be able to rise up to the occasion and equip themselves with the right kind of knowledge, attitudes, and capacities or capabilities, then you need to have an educational policy which will actually make it more vibrant for this kind of, let us say, germination of thoughts and attitudes and skills. Now, all of us are aware that in the 21st century, we are actually having a new concept of learning. I am sure many of you have read through it, and if you have not read through it, it is a document I would suggest all of you should read, that is brought out in 1996 by the UNESCO, which reads Learning in the 21st Century and Learning the Treasure Within, commonly referred to as the Jacques Delors Commission's report on education in the 21st century, where it says that learning is not a unidimensional activity. Learning has four significant pillars. One is the knowledge aspect, which is identified as learning to know. The second is the aspect of application of that knowledge and the practicum part of that knowledge, which is learning to do, or what we normally refer to as the skills or the experiential part of it. The third is learning to live together and to live with others, which is the idea of sustainability, coexistence, peacefulness, and actually moving around with the idea of moving together and contributing as a society together, and that the individual has a very significant role in having a change in the attitude of living together and to living with others. And finally, learning to be, that is the self-actualization or the self-realization of one's own innate talents and aspirations. So the four pillars of learning to know, to do, to live with others, and to live together, as well as learning to be, are the four foundational pillars of learning that was identified in 1996 and to which this policy, the NEP 2020, holds as one of the strongest philosophical foundations on the basis of which it has made its recommendations. The second very significant factor which acts as a foundation for the policy is the fact that as a country, India is a signatory to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals of 2030. And out of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which talk of a variety of things relating to people, planet, and partnerships, ranging from urban infrastructure to climate change and protection of the environment, effective and optimal uses of water resources and energy, and all aspects relating to reduction of hunger and poverty, looking at the human dignity, protection of women, all these aspects, there is an SDG 4, which is relating to education, and which says that you need to provide equitable and quality inclusive education for all with lifelong learning opportunities. Now, as a signatory to this global commitment, India has therefore got to have a policy which resonates with both these aspects of learning, the four pillars, as well as the SDG 4 goals of creating quality, equitable education with lifelong learning opportunities. Having said these two philosophical bases on which the recommendations of NEP 2020 are based on, it is important to understand that the chapter 1 of the policy of the 66-page document outlines 5 goals which are critical to this policy. And they are none other than what has been possibly heard by you many a times of access, equity, quality, affordability, and accountability. And it has also gone to outline 22 cardinal principles in the chapter 1, starting with the very significant principle that we need to recognize, nurture, sort of recognize and identify and nurture the unique potential of every single child that has come into this world, that has been created by the Creator. And to promote the holistic development of the child. And it is based on these principles that the idea of flexibility, the idea of multilingualism, the idea of promoting equitable opportunities for all who wish to come into the education system, the idea of promoting research and innovation, all these come or flow from these cardinal principles. So I would request all of you who have read through the NEP 2020 also to go back and revisit the chapter 1, which forms the basis on which many of the recommendations, and if there are apprehensions and concerns that you are having about some of the recommendations which seem to be too lofty or too idealistic, it should be understood that the principles on which the recommendations followed were these strong principles, and that is why it reads like a very aspirational document. I may clarify here that all policies are aspirational documents. They are vision documents. They are aspirational because they're forward looking. They would like to see that kind of change happening in a period of 20 to 30 years. And therefore, it is looking forward to see what are the new developments that would take place, and accordingly, what changes need to be done within the structure that exists. But it is not a legal document, and therefore it is not a justiciable right. And that is why even the 68 policy or the 86 policy, many of us would say very few of the recommendations have been implemented. Maybe about 60 to 80% of those have been implemented, but many others have not been implemented. And you can't take that to the court because it is not a legal document. It is only a statement of vision and a statement of aspiration. Now, this particular policy significantly believes in unstructuring many of the structures that are existing. And in that, particularly in the school education, a couple of recommendations that I would like those of you who are faculty even in higher education that they should know is the fundamental fact that children learn best, or their cognitive abilities develop the maximum between the ages of 3 to 6. You've already heard a number of advertisements on the television which say that the first 1,000 days of a baby's birth is very critical for the health of the child. Similarly, the ages between 0 to 6 are very critical for the cognitive development of the child, because there is evidence that says that the brain development, the neural synapses that connect and therefore causes the cognition and the ability to assimilate and the ability to coordinate happens between the ages of 3 to 6. And unfortunately, the Ministry of Education or the departments of education in the state government do not take upon themselves the responsibility of early learning. That is left to another department which takes care of women and child. And as a consequence, you have a 6-year-old who comes into class 1, who has already had more than 85% of the brain development having completed and coming into the formal schooling and unable to therefore assimilate what happens in a classroom situation. This has sought to be rectified by bringing about a very strengthened focus on early childhood care and education, and saying that this should be done collaboratively with Ministry of Women and Child, with the Ministry of Health, because at that age, nutrition, health, and education, all these three are equally critical. But currently, the education is sort of sidelined, or it is kept aside, because the Anganwadi system is unable to cope with the pressures of already handling immunization programs, looking at the nutritional level of children and other aspects of the weight of the baby and so on, that it tends to ignore, and they are not equipped or qualified to even look at the education part of those age group children. And therefore, the major recommendation in school education is the focus on early childhood care and education. Moving on further, the second significant recommendation in school education is the aspect that we have had many reports, and many of you would have read them, Pratham report or the ACER report and so on, which say that a child who's there in the class 5 is unable to do the basic counting of a child who is there in class 2, or a child who's there in class 4 is unable to read a class 1 textbook, and so on. Why does this happen? It happens because you have differential learning levels that is arising already from an inequitable early childhood care education system. Because those who are well-to-do would have sent their children to the preschools and the play schools, and these children tend to assimilate better, whereas those who did not go to such play schools or preschools and only went to the Anganwadi system would not have had that kind of assimilative abilities be created, and therefore they don't tend to understand what is happening in the formal learning when they enter class 1. And it is like sitting through a lecture. If I were to speak to you in Malayalam, which is my mother tongue, many of you, of course, because you are in Tamil Nadu, you may understand it. But if I was speaking in Greek or Latin, many of us would not understand what I'm talking about and would therefore automatically switch off or walk out of the webinar. As simple as that. But the child in a classroom situation is forced to be there because the parents and the child, the school wants the child to remain there, but the child is not understanding what is happening at all. So you have a huge dropout rate in the classes 1 to 3, and these children never come back to the schooling system. They tend to drop out because they don't understand what is happening in the classroom situation. To rectify that, we are talking about a foundational literacy and numeracy mission. It is a mission mode approach. It falls on to higher education institutions like the Ramco Institute of Technology will have to take a call on some of the recommendations that are made in higher education. How to implement that? That is not normally dictated by the state government. The state government may only play an advisory role, whereas the HEI, the institution itself, will have to play a very active role in trying to implement the policy. Now, the third change in the school education, and after that I would move on to the higher education, is a new curricular and pedagogical structure of moving away from the current 10+2 to a 5+3+3+4 structure. And this restructuring, if I may say so, is not an outcome of physical restructuring. It is more a curricular and a pedagogical restructuring. What do I mean by that? I mean to say that there is something that we call as age-appropriate learning. And children in different age groups have different abilities to learn and different capabilities in the way they learn itself. It is not the learning itself, it is the way you learn. Learning how to learn is what we are trying to focus on in NEP 2020. There is a way of learning how to learn. And that is what the curricular and pedagogical restructuring is all about, which is therefore saying the first 5 years, which is from ages 3 to 8, formational stage. The ages 3 to 8, 8 to 11 form your preparatory stage. 11 to 14 is your middle stage, and 14 to 18 is your secondary stage. So moving from age 3 to age 18, in 4 stages, we are recognizing that children learn in a different manner. And therefore, the kind of curricular choices that children are given, the kind of pedagogical tools that teachers will have to use, the kind of assessment patterns that you may have to use, will all have to undergo changes. And what are these largely? These are largely arising that you must give flexibility, because if you go by the first principle that we have outlined in the introductory chapter, to recognize and identify and nurture the unique talents and potential of every child, it means that there may be children who may not necessarily be very good at academics, or who may not necessarily like only science and mathematics, but who may like many other subjects. And these subjects are not being allowed to be taken by the child because you have rigid academic structures that are being followed. Academic structures meaning you define something as curricular, co-curricular, extracurricular, vocational, academic, arts, science, performing arts, sports, all these are different. And therefore, a child's holistic development is not just learning science and maths. We have reduced this country to a situation where you only think that there are 2 things to be learned in this world, and that is only science and maths. And that is why you see a lot of social crisis that is happening in the society. Children have different talents and different potentials. It can be in sports, it can be in music, it can be in dance, it can be in languages, it can be in sociology, it can be in economics, it can be in architecture, whatever it is. But you have restricted all that, and you have defined that this is all that is glorious and that is to be learned, nothing else has to be learned. And as parents, we do the greatest disservice by actually forcing our children not to do as per their aptitudes and as per their innate talents and potential, but force them to do what may have been unfulfilled ambitions that we may have had, or we would like to see them as clones. Let us understand NASA's one report makes one of the most scathing reports on the schooling systems. It says that children are unique, but by the time they come out of the schooling system, they are like robots. They only tend to behave identically like clones. Now, this is where we are destroying the uniqueness of every child. You should allow the flowering of every individual child, and they are not, 100 children are not one replicating the other 99, or 99 are not replicating that one. And we are actually doing that. We are, as parents, as teachers, as educational institutions, doing great disservice to our young students by making them identical in their tastes and in their talents and in their potential. And this is what we are trying to change in the new curricular restructuring by allowing a flexibility in the curricular choices. If you therefore allow a flexibility and allow a student to take up maybe maths and maybe music and maybe dance and maybe a sport or a language, then you should have a totally different manner in which educational institutions and schools will have to teach their children. And therefore, the pedagogical tools for that will have to change. And you will have to move away from memorization and rote learning to experiential learning, activity-based learning, promoting the scientific temper, developing the critical thinking, developing cognitive abilities, and application of knowledge rather than the theoretical merely memorization of that knowledge. Accordingly, the assessment patterns would change. So when we say the foundational, the preparatory, the middle, and the secondary stages, at each level, we are building on to the ability of the children to learn in a certain manner, and moving from maybe the specifics to the general, and moving from the basics to the advanced, and allowing the children to have flexibility, moving towards experiential learning, developing their critical abilities, and therefore having a holistic development. And in this whole exercise, the importance of language learning and multilingualism has been significantly focused in our policy, where we are talking about allowing children to have the ability to start learning in their early years in their mother tongue, which has been misinterpreted by many as saying that if you don't allow children to learn in English medium, there is no way that their cognitive development takes place. It is highly fallacious to think that, because unlike other countries in the world where only one language is being spoken, we are a country that is blessed with having a plurality of languages. And the richness and diversity of every single language needs to be recognized and respected and developed and promoted. And if you have to have a generation of children who would not understand the richness and diversity of Indian languages, we would actually have a situation where 20 years from now, people would hardly know only one or two languages. And all other languages would either have become extinct or would no longer be known to this generation of children at all. So to promote the idea of multilingualism and to promote the idea that children learn best when they learn in their mother tongue, it is not to say that they would not learn English or they would not learn other languages. The state governments, along with the availability of teachers, can take a call on how to go about it. But the idea is to promote multilingualism because there is a direct correlation and scientific evidence to say that children who learn multiple languages actually tend to perform better and as they grow into their more advanced years, because their cognitive abilities are stimulated to the maximum when they learn multiple languages and not when they learn only one single language. Now, moving now from school to higher education, the principles of flexibility and allowing the disciplinary boundaries to disappear is something that we have brought into higher education. And that is the concept of holistic, multidisciplinary undergraduate education. In our draft NEP, we use the word liberal arts education, which is what it is to say multidisciplinary. But for lack of understanding of the terminology of liberal arts, which is seen as rather a Western concept, we tended to use a more a phrase that could be easily associated by Indian institutions and for the Indian scenario, and that is the idea of holistic multidisciplinary education. What do we mean by this? It is going to actually transform undergraduate education altogether. For example, Ramco Institute of Technology, which I think is largely an engineering and technology based institution, will have to move to become a multidisciplinary university. And we are going to do away with this nomenclature of calling higher education institutions by different terminologies. India has one of the largest higher education systems in the world. We claim to have something like 1,000 odd universities, some 30,000 odd standalone institutions, some 40,000 affiliated colleges, and we call them by different nomenclatures. We call them as central universities, state universities, technical institutions, deemed universities, private universities, affiliating universities, unitary universities, you name it. And then some of them have brand names like the IITs and the NITs and the ISRs and so on. We would like to have a uniform nomenclature. All higher education institutions should be called as universities or confined to be called a higher education institution. And all of them by nature should be multidisciplinary in nature. Because you have disciplinary boundaries of very hard silo-based education, you are actually narrowing down the scope of knowledge. And knowledge itself is very interdisciplinary, is very multidisciplinary, is intradisciplinary, is transdisciplinary, and the porosity of knowledge is going to create a situation where we commonly say that we do not know what are the jobs of tomorrow. Why is it happening? Because you are living in a society or a world where technology, the fact that COVID has brought us together on a webinar, technology has taken over many things. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics, big data, they all will take away jobs that human beings were doing. And these machines will therefore redefine the kind of jobs that are going to come about. And that is why this common statement, we do not know what the jobs of tomorrow are looking like. If we do not know what the jobs of tomorrow are looking like, then are we equipping our students with that kind of an unknown factor? Then you need to actually give them the knowledge of many fields and the 21st century skills of collaborative learning, of critical thinking, of scientific thinking, and allow them to actually have the ability to adapt to change in the speed with which it is taking place and the dynamism with which it is taking place. So if you need to do that, you cannot continue to provide a silo-based education where students only specialize in a particular narrow discipline and is totally oblivious of developments that take place in other disciplines. So the multidisciplinary approach allows a student to take up maybe a subject of mechanical engineering, along with maybe sociology, along with a sport, along with a language, or along with some other performing arts, and decide over a 4-year period which are the 1 or 2 subjects in which the student may like to major in. But to do that, all higher education institutions may have to move towards becoming multidisciplinary institutions. Now, this is not an easy task. At the same time, we are aware of the fact that if these changes have to take place, we should change many other things within the system. And that is why we have said that since it is going to be a very long drawn kind of a reform, we will have higher education institutions either function as a cluster, or we will allow students to not only to take in, the student takes an admission in, let us say, Ramco Institute of Technology. But Ramco Institute of Technology does not have a course in music or does not have a course in, let us say, sociology. The student will have the freedom to take that course from another institution in the same geographical vicinity, or do it as an open and distance learning, or do it as a completely massive open online course, what we call as MOOCs. So the student has the flexibility by taking admission in a particular institution to choose from subjects that may not be available in that institution, in keeping with the idea of a multidisciplinary education, to take it up from other institutions in the same area, or in an ODL mode from a totally different region, need not be Tamil Nadu, it can be Delhi or any other place, or a massive open online course which is offered through SWAYAM or through any other university. So the flexibility comes in the choice of the course, in the different institutions, in the mode of learning, and the student has a flexibility to do either a 3-year undergraduate program or a 4-year undergraduate program. The student at every stage of first year, second year, third year, and fourth year has got an option of actually doing it together or leaving and rejoining, what we call a modular approach of entry and exit. But at every exit, the student will be given a certificate, that is a certificate at the end of the first year, or a diploma at the end of the second year, or a normal bachelor's degree at the end of the third year. And the student is doing a 4 years of multidisciplinary, majoring in more than 2 subjects or confining to majoring in 2 subjects. Then that person would be given a bachelor's in multidisciplinary education. And if the student does it with a research project, then that student can go directly to join a PhD program. So the duration also is flexible. A student who does a 3 years bachelor's will go in to do a 2 years of master's. A student who does a 4 years of bachelor's will do a 1 year of master's. Now, you must understand these flexibilities in terms of the choice of courses, in the duration, in the institution or the mode of learning, as well as institution can explore, well, whether what are the additional disciplines that we can offer, and which are the other disciplines which a student, if joining RIT, can take up from other institutions in and around Madurai or some other place, or do through ODL system, or do through MOOCs. That needs to be articulated in an institutional development plan. So the strategic plan of action has to be prepared by every institution. And this is the criticality of how much the NEP 2020 will actually be implemented in letter and spirit by the educational institutions. It is no doubt a very daunting task, but the fact that we recognize that knowledge is porous, that knowledge is interdisciplinary. Let us say, for example, COVID as a pandemic is not just a health crisis. It has become a social crisis. It has become an economic crisis. It has become a livelihood crisis. And it has become a psychological crisis. So it has moved to becoming, from what it was as merely a health crisis, to so many other dimensions. That is the kind of world in which we are going to live in. And therefore, if you equip students with single discipline silo-based knowledge, let us be sure that what India is claiming to have the youngest population in the world, as which we say is a demographic advantage of an average age of 29 years, which we are going to see till almost 2029, we will not be able to convert that demographic window that we have into an advantage. It would become a disaster as we look at it. In order to change that, we need to actually equip our students with multiple knowledges, with multiple competencies, multiple skills. It can be vocational education, it can be pure knowledge, it can be research, any of these, but you allow the student to take up more than one discipline in different areas so that they are able to actually cope up with the kind of changes that are happening in the economy due to the influx of technology and due to the overreaching command of what nations are looking at today. I'm sure 2 days back, all of you would have been glued to watching the election results of the United States of America. It's not a country that we are living in. But why are we doing that? Because the globe is a village today, and developments that happen in one part of the world impact other countries, and our children are there across the globe. So also there are students from across the globe who are here. So we need to be globally at par. And we should not continue to confine ourselves to an education system which seems to have outlived the purpose, and therefore the move towards moving towards a holistic, multidisciplinary undergraduate program with flexibility in curricular choices in the mode of learning. And this is possible because we are talking about a very customized form of learning through an academic bank of credit, where every student's credit sheet will look different, even though the student may be passing out of maybe the same institution. So what is this academic bank of credit? It is a credit bank where the student will store the academic credits acquired either from the institution that he or she is admitted, or from other institutions from where the person has done a course, or from an ODL credit system, or from MOOCs. All of this together will make that student's academic bank of credit have, let us say it is 120 credits, he or she will have 120 credits, but what A will have will not be the same as what B will have, because the choice of courses, the kind of mode of learning, all this would be different for every student. It is therefore what we may say customized learning, suited to individual aspirations, suited to individual talents, and not saying that this is my menu card, this is what you can take and nothing else you can take. If not, you need to walk out of that restaurant. You have to therefore have a situation where the bouquet of courses that an institution offers should not confine a student to choosing only from that bouquet of courses, but allow that student to take up from multiple institutions, different modes of learning or MOOCs, and allow that student to therefore have a combination of courses, ultimately where the student will have to decide what are the one or two major subjects on which he or she would like to major in. By the time the student is firming up the mind, that need not necessarily be decided in the first year, that may be decided in the second or the third year. Or if the student feels that no, I will take only 2 years, I will take a diploma, go into the world of work, come back and join in the third year, that flexibility is also being allowed. So the total undergraduate program that is currently in offer will be changed, and it will also change the character of the institutions, because all HEIs will move towards becoming multidisciplinary universities. Now, as far as the structure of the universities itself is concerned, but largely when we say knowledge assimilation, it is information gathering. Knowledge creation is the research and innovation. And of course, community service is the extension activity that we normally talk of. But it is the teaching and the research which are very interrelated. And unfortunately, undergraduate education focuses largely on teaching. And then we say that as a country, India's research contribution is very, very less. How do you expect a student who is almost 22 years after having completed an undergraduate degree to then contribute to research if nothing of research has even been instilled at the undergraduate level? And that is why we have said that universities can be teaching intensive but have research, and universities can be research intensive but should also have teaching. But teaching intensive would mean the focus of that institution is largely on undergraduate teaching, but they will nurture research, they will ignite the research spirit in youngsters, in the undergraduate students, but at the same time, the focus of it would be largely on teaching. The other side of the coin is the research intensive universities, and these will focus largely on doctoral research or postdoctoral research, but at the same time will have some element of undergraduate teaching also. Teaching and research are very interrelated and interconnected. But if India has to make a mark in the global committee for its research contributions, in patents and publications, then you need to germinate research at a very young age. And that is why even in the school education, the idea of having flexibility in the curricular choices is to allow that kind of freedom of nurturing a scientific temper in children rather than confining them to think in a very structured manner. Research cannot take place if you do not allow the spirit of inquiry and the spirit to think out of the box or the spirit to have innovation. You must encourage students to be curious, to be inquisitive, to ask questions, to question what is there, because only then research comes into being. And so at undergraduate level, the two major changes we are looking at, and this is not going to be imposed by either the government of India or the state government. Many would feel we are trying to impose something. Not at all. Ultimately, a higher education institution is an autonomous body, and it is capable of taking its own decisions and arriving at decisions on its own. And we are only empowering them to make a choice for themselves, whether they would like to be a teaching intensive university or a research intensive university. Moving further, the center of this NEP 2020, whether it is school education or higher education, is the student. And we want the student to have optimal learning environments, very conducive learning environments, which allows for their holistic development, which means that the development need not be confined only to academics. Children should be encouraged to have debates, participate in youth activities, poetry competitions, sports events, cultural events, all sorts of competitions which should take place in a university life. Unfortunately, our higher education institutions are so focused on only concentrating on the academic part that you just do not allow for the nurturing of talent in other areas, whether it is in sports. So you think that it is something unique for someone to excel in sports. But ultimately, there is talent in many of our youngsters. We have not made an attempt to even explore or identify whether that talent exists or not. And today you therefore have lots of channels, television channels. We talk about music competitions, dance competitions, and so on. Why is it that it happens only on entertainment? It is not entertainment. Every child has that talent. And as institutions, it should not be seen as something that is distant away from education. It is a part of the holistic development, that both public institutions and private institutions will be treated alike. And while government-funded government institutions, government-aided institutions, and pure private also will all facilitate giving more scholarships. And we have stipulated that 25 to 50%, even in private institutions, will be set aside for scholarships, so that every meritorious student will have an equal opportunity for accessing higher education. On the aspect of equity, therefore, not just the economic measures of scholarship, but also the facilities that need to be provided. Also in school education, it is important to note, we have said about having Indian Sign Language, so that there is a common sign language for those who are hearing impaired, and for those with differently abled children coming from autism or many other forms of disabilities that can be developmental disorders. We have said in school education, because if you leave them aside, then I don't think we can keep up with the goal of sustainable development. They constitute a large number, and it is clear that there are these twice exceptional children, particularly those who are autistic children. They are actually having an exceptional ability in some other area. Those children are called as twice exceptional. They are gifted children. Gifted in the sense, not that they are child prodigies, but they have a disability in one area, and therefore by nature the creator has given them a sort of a very unique ability in some other area. And that ability is the one that we need to nurture in the school age. And therefore for the differently abled, in the school education itself, we have talked about a number of measures, including a scheme for the gifted children. In that we will also look at the twice exceptional children. And these children therefore will have an ability to come into the higher education system also. So on the equity part, we have tried to actually address all sorts of inequities arising out of economic factors, gender factors, socio-cultural factors, and therefore your caste and community basis, language factors. All these have sought to be addressed through a number of strategies and interventions. Now, coming to faculty, the critical driver of all this change is many of you who are hearing this webinar today, and that is the faculty. I come from the teaching fraternity myself, And I can say with absolute clarity that the ones who resist the change are us as teachers. Because we are in a comfort zone where we've been teaching a subject in a certain manner. And that manner we would not like to change. And those teachers, basically all faculty, will have to reinvent themselves. We have devoted a chapter 13, for energized, motivated, energized, and capable faculty. The faculty is the one who is going to drive most of the reforms of NEP 2020. And therefore, we have said that firstly, restore the dignity of teaching as a profession. Accept that this is having to have the kind of payments that need to come for the corporate sector. And with the Sixth Pay Commission, more or less this has been done because faculty payments have been of a very respectable order compared to what it was much earlier. And therefore, it is therefore an attractive profession. Many of us join teaching because it happens to be our passion and our commitment, and not because it is only a source of livelihood. And we are not trying to say that therefore they should be like saints or gurus or something who have given up all their things to become teachers. After all, teachers are all human beings, and therefore they have to be well compensated monetarily for the time and effort that they put in. But having restored the dignity of the profession, we need to also say that teachers have to be trained in a continuous manner. And therefore, their continuous professional development becomes very, very critical, and it should take place in a consistent and in a regular manner. At the same time, they should be having proper avenues for their promotion and for their career growth, even moving up to leadership positions. So we have actually envisaged that someone who is joining as an assistant professor will have the kind of capacity building and training with the regular promotions, can also think on to become even the vice chancellor or the director of an institution to reach academic leadership positions. In fact, as a policy, we have said that heads of academic institutions must be faculty and not administrators. The crisis of higher education comes from the leadership that many of the institutions have, because unless you have faculty moving on to take up academic leadership positions, you will not be able to understand the emphasis of teaching and research, which is the core function of a higher education institution. And therefore, empowering faculty, but having a robust recruitment system, having a tenure track, and on this I may like to clarify, the idea of a tenure track system is to bring about a degree of accountability. Now, many feel that tenure track is a very westernized concept. We already have an idea of a probation period. But the idea of a probation and therefore subsequent to that a confirmation where no one can touch you till you retire unless you have done something which is not constitutional or which is a crime makes you very condescending in your attitude and your approach. And it is only in higher education that the learning outcomes of the students are not directly related to the learning that takes place in the class, which is very, very wrong scientifically. Just as a school teacher is accountable for the learning outcomes, similarly, a higher education faculty must be accountable for the learning outcomes of the students. You cannot therefore derive any kind of insulation from accountability if you taught a class of about 70 students in engineering, and then you find that out of 70 students, 55 of them are lying unemployed. Who is responsible for that? You as the faculty, you as the institution. Let us be fair that a system cannot say that it is not my responsibility to teach the students and ensure that the students get a job. If that is not the responsibility, then who is responsible for it? You have to accept the fact that just as school teachers are responsible for the results that their students bring, similarly, it is the higher education faculty and the higher education institutions who are responsible for the results that their students bring, and so also the subsequent employability indexes that they have. So higher education institutions will have to start becoming transparent in the kind of employability that they have achieved and how many of their students actually got the kind of core employment related to their area of study, and that kind of, so you have a very damaging statement by a public service commission member who said for the position of a clerk or an assistant, 80% of the applicants were engineers. Is that what they learned engineering for? To become a clerk in a government office? If so, there is something fundamentally wrong with the kind of engineering education we give. So the idea of accountability of faculty is something that is core to the NEP. While recognizing that teaching is a dignified profession, teaching must be compensated monetarily, teachers must be provided the right kind of career progression and career advancement to go on to leadership positions, give them leadership development programs, at the same time have robust recruitment, very strong, transparent promotion policies, and also say that you have a tenure track so that a kind of laxity does not set in. And it is a combined effort where it is not to do any kind of blame mongering, but the idea is that teachers need to be empowered to actually be able to perform their roles. Teachers, therefore, have a very critical role in framing the institutional development plan. They will also be an active participant in framing the institutional development plan. Therefore, they are also to become a part and parcel of their internal governance. And the idea, therefore, that teachers would be empowered is stemming from the fact that teachers will have the autonomy to decide how they transact the curriculum in the class. Teachers will have the autonomy to frame the curricula that they want. Teachers will have the autonomy to decide the pedagogical tools. Teachers will have the freedom to decide the assessment tools. But teachers will also have to be accountable so that they are responsible for the learning outcomes of the students who are coming to them in their higher education classes. So at the same time, they will have a voice in the governing bodies. They will become a part and parcel of framing the institutional development plan. And we are hoping that this entire thing of autonomy and accountability and participation in the internal governance will empower the faculty to understand, yes, we are important and we will perform our roles in the most effective manner, in a more energized, reinvigorated manner, and continue with our motivation, because I'm sure more than 90% of the faculty join teaching profession because they have a passion for teaching, and that commitment is more or less unquestionable. It is almost taken for granted that a faculty has come in because of the passion and the commitment. How do you sustain that passion and how do you sustain that motivation is what the NEP 2020 says in chapter 30 on the various opportunities for continuous professional development and of career growth and progression, helping them to do their research, not subjecting them to do non-academic activities, encouraging them to become autonomous teachers, and finally having a voice in the internal governance of that institution. Now coming to the next recommendation, and that is on internationalization. I'll stop in another 10 minutes from now so that we would have time for interaction. On internationalization, you are aware that it is there currently also. In the sense, you have students coming from foreign universities who do courses here, and so also from here who go and do courses outside in what we call as joint twinning programs. So twinning programs are generally accepted. But we have gone further to that, and we have said that internationalization of higher education will take place by encouraging not only student mobility, not just through twinning programs, but by actually acquiring credits by joining other universities outside. Also faculty mobility, and you have a program of Government of India, GYAN and GYAN Plus, and this would be upscaled because you will have faculty mobility where faculty from institutions here could be given sabbaticals to go and teach in universities abroad as much as faculty from other institutions come here. But the most important recommendation of internationalization is allowing institutional internationalization, by which I mean that foreign universities will be allowed to open up campuses here, and vice versa, universities in India can be allowed to open up campuses outside. Many would feel, why do we have to do that? Because it is against equity considerations. Let us be clear that the more you have competition, the better you tend to raise the bar or the standard. And competition is not an ugly word. You should encourage competition as long as it is healthy and as long as you go by the rules of the game. Now, the whole idea of liberalization and allowing for foreign brands, allowing for a lot of international banks, it has affected all sectors of the economy, whether it is in trade, whether it is in economy, whether it is in production, whatever, manufacturing, and so on. Why should education therefore be out of it? And as a signatory to the General Agreement for Trades and Services, we already accept that there will be international mobility. If you say so, the only consideration that we are having is that, one, we may prevent a lot of students who are going outside from this country and therefore draining the revenue of this country to actually continue doing international programs over here. The other is that some of our best performing universities will actually try to set up their campuses outside. Now, this kind of what we may say mobility that happens between institutions will see a lot of changes in the landscape of our education landscape of higher education in our country. Now, this is a recommendation which can come only through legislation, and therefore, unless a bill is moved in the parliament and unless it is passed on the floor of the house, the opening up of campuses by foreign universities here and vice versa is something that can become only a reality then. But on internationalization, faculty student mobility, this is something that is doable even now, and the policy has created an enabling mechanism. But even for this, the rules and regulations will have to be notified. I may mention here that policy does not immediately make something effective unless it is supported by the issuance of rules and regulations. So moving to a 4-year program, having an option of 2 years of masters or 1 year of masters, all this is subject to either the UGC or the Higher Education Commission of India bringing out appropriate rules and regulations. This brings me to the governance part of it. And before I move to governance, let me touch upon NRF also. The National Research Foundation is a body, umbrella body, that is already being established. It is not being handled, or rather it has been created by the Office of the Principal Scientific Advisor to the Prime Minister, though it is an NEP recommendation. The idea is to create an umbrella architecture which will bring all research together and promote social science research, research in languages, research in interdisciplinary areas, cutting edge areas of artificial intelligence, and most importantly, to bring about research in undergraduate education. Now, this is a very critical role of NRF, that undergraduate education will be nurtured with some amount of research culture so that you can promote, as I said, knowledge creation, leading to patents, better publications, innovation, and entrepreneurial skills. Entrepreneurship, job creators rather than job seekers can come about only if you nurture a spirit of research and innovation. So the NRF will catalyze research in multiple areas and allow for cross-germination of disciplines and cross-disciplinary research, as much as bring industry, academia, and research labs together. This whole research culture with enhanced funding, currently we are only having 0.8% investment in research. This needs to be escalated to almost 2%. Only then can India make its mark felt in the global map for research productivity. Our research output and our research productivity can be enhanced only by efforts of a body that we thought could be created, and that is how the NRF has come into being. The last point I tried to touch upon is maybe 2 points. One is the technology, maybe touch upon technology first. The policy has 2 chapters, chapter 23 and chapter 24, written on the use of technology, enhanced use of technology, deepened use of technology, expanded use of technology for not just teaching and learning, but for educational administration and for data management. And we have said about creation of a National Education Technology Forum, which will propel this activity so that appropriate technologies are used for different educational purposes. Currently, the idea that one size fits all and the same technology should be used whether you're learning engineering or whether you're learning economics or whether you're learning music or whether you're learning any other field is an inappropriate and an incorrect way of looking at technology use for education. And therefore, decisions relating to the appropriateness of technology, as much as the creation of e-content, all these would be driven by the NETF. You are aware that we already have platforms like Swayam, Diksha, we have 32 direct-to-home channels. All these will be sort of upscaled to actually have an influence of technology. And thanks to COVID, in another sense, not because of the pandemic, technology acceleration has taken place because of COVID, making it almost inevitable to use technology for teaching learning purposes. The chapter 24 we have written in the month of March after the global pandemic struck us. And that is why we have put forward this idea of looking at the digital divide and the inequitable access to digital devices. Now, this is a matter of concern. While you and I are belonging to an elite club of people where there is internet bandwidth, most of India or large sections of this country do not have bandwidth penetration. And if you don't have internet penetration, you cannot have synchronous learning. Remote learning cannot take place in a asynchronous manner. And currently, what is therefore happening is that you have a sizable section of school children and higher education institutions which are in rural areas actually having a one-sided learning that is taking place. And you know that learning has to be a two-sided process. So you are actually denying a sizable section, and this is going to be a generational loss of for children who are not having internet penetration. And therefore, we need to leverage the radio, the television, the satellite, and many other forms in which we are able to reach out to providing learning resources to our students who are there in the rural and other areas where there is not much of bandwidth penetration available. So the chapter 24 talks about the lack of student preparedness, lack of parental preparedness, the lack of institutional preparedness, and ultimately the lack of faculty preparedness. Now, for this, we have said training can be one of the ways to address the lack of faculty preparedness for the very wide, expansive way of looking at online learning and online examinations and so on. But there has to be a lot of training that happens. Institutional preparedness, whether the right kind of digital infrastructure is there. If not, that kind of infrastructure would have to be made available. Parental preparedness, their governmental roles will come into playing for advocacy as well as for providing digital devices, whether it is televisions or whether it is tablets or whether it is handheld devices and smartphones, whatever it is. And finally, the student preparedness, where actually I would feel in this whole lot, it is the students who are belonging to this millennium who are having not so much of a problem as much as we have. Therefore, it is not the student preparedness that is a big issue, but student preparedness of those living in the rural areas is something that we need to combat, because usually learning is a peer activity. And the fact that you're learning it in the isolation in your own homes, which are not necessarily conducive to a learning environment. It is not that all children would have the facility of having an independent room where the student is taking place learning with the teacher in a very insulated manner. That kind of environment is not there in a country like ours, which is a developing country. And therefore, the, the kind of preparedness of all these four factors, of all these four important stakeholders, is very critical to having a very effective use of technology for better teaching learning. But we all know that technology is the way forward. We have to think in ways that we can leverage it in the best manner possible. The last point is on governance and regulation. Internal governance, all HEIs will have an empowered board of governors, which will be a collegiate composite body combining students, faculty, eminent educationists, industrialists, members of the civil society, and other interested people in that region who will prepare the institutional development plan and monitor the academic progress of the institution. So the empowered board of governors is going to be a very different body, which will be self-selected and not created by the government and not with bureaucratic interference. But at the same time, to have that kind of an empowered board of governors functioning in a very fair, transparent manner, we have said that you should depend upon self-disclosure and making available information in public domain for the benefit of all the stakeholders. So the idea of transparency, let us say a faceless technology using information in a very effective form of disclosure and audit, at the same time having financial disclosures, ensuring that they follow concerns of equity, at the same time ensuring that it would be a composite decision-making body free from political and administrative interference is very, very critical to this, to the aspect of robust internal governance systems of higher education institutions. On the external part of governance, we come to regulation of higher education. You are aware of the UGC and the AICTE. Nothing is wrong with these two bodies. And India has been thinking of having reforms in the regulatory system. Right from 2006, since the National Knowledge Commission talked about an Indian Regulatory Authority for Education, Higher Education, IRAE, followed by what we call the National Commission for Higher Education and Research, then coming to the idea of a higher education regulatory agency. Now, all these ideas were floated, but none of these reforms took place. We are not talking about old wine in new bottle. We are only talking about a fundamental principle of regulation. And that is the four functions of regulation, accreditation, funding, and academic standard setting are currently being performed by the same body that we call the University Grants Commission or the All India Council for Technical Education. These four functions, it is like saying the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary should be in the same body. The idea of division of powers arises from the fact that there are mutual conflicts of interest and over-concentration of powers. Therefore, the NEP 2020 has talked about a light but tight regulatory system by separating the four functions of regulation, funding, accreditation, and standard setting, and saying that these will be performed by independent bodies, but there will be an umbrella architecture which will coordinate between these independent bodies. And therefore, the Higher Education Commission of India will be the umbrella architecture with four independent verticals for regulation: the National Higher Education Regulatory Council, the UGC, AICTE, NCT, and the 17 professional councils that we have will concede the regulatory powers to the National Higher Education Regulatory Council. You will have a new body for accreditation. The existing NAC and NBA will become a part of that National Accreditation Council, which will have multiple accrediting bodies created also. You will have a Higher Education Grants Council, which will take care of the funding part of it. And finally, you will have all regulatory councils which are given away their regulatory powers, converting themselves to becoming professional standard setting bodies or PSSBs. And because the UGC will also be non-existent, there will be a General Education Council which will take care of all such courses which are not being taken care by the professional standard setting bodies, which are the other regulatory council. In this whole architecture, we have not touched upon the regulation of medical education and legal education. The reasons why we have excluded them, please understand, they will be part of the multidisciplinary education. Therefore, you will have medical education available in multidisciplinary institutions. You will also have legal education there. But the regulation of medical education as well as legal education, because there are two new bodies that were created in 2019, we have chosen not to touch them at the moment. And we have also found that it was because earlier attempts to bring about regulatory reforms have been badly affected in the parliament. When these two sectors were being touched, we have thought that while making them a part of the multidisciplinary education, let the regulation remain with the independent bodies that have very recently been created in 2019. So the architecture of regulation of light but tight is a Higher Education Commission of India, which will have 4 independent verticals for regulation, standard setting, funding, and accreditation. And it will perform the role, the HECI will perform the role of looking at a coordination between these 4 and any issues of conflict that takes place between these 4. Finally, coming to the finances, we have articulated a long pending goal, which we have reiterated again, of 6% of GDP. Many would ask, why did we put this? As a country, we project ourselves to become a 3 trillion economy and so on. Currently, of course, there is a crisis and therefore there is a strain on the resources. But that doesn't mean a policy should not envision a kind of an investment that we require to ask the government of India and the state governments to put in. And therefore, we have talked about spending about 6% or investing rather 6% of the gross domestic product in education. At the same time, we have said that there are many other sources of revenue that could come in through philanthropy, through endowment fund, through alumni funding, many other ways in which industry can contribute to corporate social responsibility. And all these should be therefore able to bring about the much needed reforms that the NEP has talked about. The implementation, we have said that the existing body, the Central Advisory Board on Education, unlike what we wrote in our report, the Rashtriya Shiksha Ayog, we have dumped that idea. The Central Advisory Board on Education, a body that is existing since 1920, will be strengthened, will be made more strong. It is a federal body which has both the Government of India ministries and the state government. It would be strengthened and sort of remodeled to become like a standing education commission, which will continue to guide the Ministry of Education and the state governments in not only the policy vision as well as the implementation of the NEP. How long is it going to take to implement this policy? It will be in phases. It will not happen in one go, but we are expecting, and I did not touch upon these standalone institutions, particularly in teacher education, management education, and so on. All standalone institutions by 2030 would have to convert themselves to become what we call multidisciplinary institutions. And related to this is the whole idea of a major reform in the affiliating system, which also escaped my attention, and that we will move away from an affiliating system by about 2035 to a graded autonomous colleges or degree granting autonomous colleges. That is, of course, the longest reform. The idea is that leaving out colleges which are in unserved or in rural areas so that they are not affected. All colleges which are currently affiliated to the host university, there are as many as 800 affiliated colleges in some of the universities. They will all move to become autonomous degree granting colleges through a mechanism of mentoring and hand-holding, both by the host university as well as by the state government, to achieve certain benchmarks of standards and excellence and accreditation, and over a period of 15 years become autonomous degree granting colleges. That is not to say that all the 40,000 colleges would become that. Some of them would become a part of a larger university. Some of them would become constituent colleges, and many have the opportunity to become autonomous degree granting colleges. But the implementation of NEP 2020 is something that will happen in phases. Some which are not necessarily of a legislative nature will happen in about 3 to 5 years, some others in about 7 years, and many changes would happen between 7 to 10 years. And the GER quantitative target of 50% is to be achieved by 2035, and therefore that is one of the longest hauls. So also the removal of the affiliation system and moving away from standalone institutions to multidisciplinary would be one of the longest reforms. Overall, as I said, the NEP 2020, by about a period of 10 years, you would have an education system which is looking very different from what it is currently. And the idea is not to bring about change just for the purpose of change alone, but to ensure that we empower our students, teachers, and higher education institutions to ensure, to sort of actually develop the right kind of knowledge, skills, and capabilities essential for meeting the challenges of a 21st century. It's been a long talk, but I'm open to questions from now on, please. I hope somebody can moderate that for me. Thank you.
Hari Om, madam. Hari Om.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Madam, your development is.
Please introduce yourself first.
I am Dr. P. Ramesh from Rajapalayam, NE Annaparaja Imperial Higher Secondary School headmaster. I'm very happy to hear all your work. In that, you have said that holistic development in the sense spiritually, morally, emotionally, psychologically, everything you have to include.
Right.
But in the school education and higher education, so far they have not at all stressed about the moral values, the moral education. Previously, it was in the curriculum, the moral education, a separate period was allotted. Separate 45 minutes class was allotted. But now there is no importance given even from the school education. As my humble request, you are in a central, you have to stress about this moral value education as one of the period allotted for the entire state and even the higher education. Thank you, ma'am.
Don't worry about this aspect, because we are going to have a new national curriculum framework for school education. And maybe you have not read the part where we have focused on the importance of values, including stating the values of Satya, Ahimsa, and tolerance, and so on. We have actually stipulated that in the NEP 2020. I don't know how you have missed it, but it has been reiterated not only in our chapter 1, but very clearly in chapter 4, where we talk about the integration of values and constitutional values, including duties, as a very critical part. So the national curriculum framework for school education will ensure that the proper infusion of morals and values which are critical to the making of an individual will be given the due attention when they formulate the new curriculum. Please be assured about that. Dr. Sivakumar, if there are no more questions, do you have something that you have from your institution side? Please feel free to ask, and maybe we can wind up immediately after that. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Dear participants, kindly post your questions in the chat box or directly unmute and then clarify your doubts with the resource person.
Ma'am, this is Deepalakshmi again. There is a question in YouTube, ma'am, through participant they've asked. Without strengthening the existing ITIs, polytechnics, and vocational courses in high schools and junior colleges, how can we promote vocational education combining with traditional academics?
I actually should have touched upon vocationalization of education. We have a separate chapter where, as I said, cross-cutting themes We have set separate chapters for that, and under the key focus areas, we have talked about vocationalization of education, both integrating it in school education from class 6 or the middle stage onwards, as well as in higher education as part of the multidisciplinary education. Now, we are very much seized of the fact that training of vocational teachers is a very important activity. Currently, of course, it is not taking place as much as desired, but as part of this policy, though we may not have specifically mentioned these types of institutions by name as ITIs or polytechnics, the whole idea of strengthening all institutional structures which are looking at vocational education, but embedding that as part of the mainstream education, that is where the challenges lie. Now, we have said at the school level when we are introducing it in class 6, currently there may not be school teachers who are available to teach that, but we have said India is having a lot of local craftsmen who are actually having that kind of exposure to local crafts, and these can be encouraged in the schooling stage like carpentry and pottery and blacksmithy and so on. And we have said a 10 days bagless period where students can intern with these local craftsmen. Of course, the whole guidelines need to be formulated for that. Similarly, in a school complex, we have said that they can hire or rather maybe engage the services in a volunteer basis so that this kind of exposure is given. Now, in higher education, we are talking about firstly a new body that will be created, a national committee for integration of vocational education, and that we will have a lot of alignment between the existing national skill qualifications framework with also the recognition of the national occupational standards with prior learning or our prior learning that already people have, all these being taken together. And I may mention here, because simultaneously I am also a part of this science, technology and innovation policy which currently the government of India is bringing about. Even there we are talking about modernizing the manner in which vocational education or skilling in higher education is taking place. So our instrumentation labs and other kind of fabrication materials and so on, the fab labs that we have, all these will be modernized so that if you are learning any of these skills or traits, that will be of the state of the art, which can be internationally competitive. So the whole idea of emphasizing on vocational education has been given due attention. Maybe we have not used the terminologies of ITIs or polytechnics, but these will also have to undergo the kind of transformation and reforms that we have envisaged in NEP 2020.
Okay. Thank you, madam. Madam, for undergraduate programs, admissions will be through assessment method. Then what about private sectors? Okay, private institutes, whether they need to conduct a separate test, or what kind of policies they need to follow?
As far as NEP 2020 is concerned, we were very concerned that there are students being subjected to multiple entrance examinations for getting admissions to the undergraduate programs. The idea of NEP 2020 as a policy is that we will do away with this multiplicity of exams leading to student stress and therefore leading to a coaching culture and also leading to student suicides. These are all interrelated. There's a side business that goes on as the coaching culture there, and therefore you have full page advertisements, and God alone knows what happens to those children after those photographs come in the papers, whether they continue their studies, complete it, get a job, we have no idea about it. But we all are deriving an enormous sense of satisfaction in seeing the full page advertisements with about 100 children's micro photographs being shown as having excelled. This whole thing needs to go. If we are creating a knowledge society, we need to have a system where children coming from a normal school and a normal college is equipped with the right kind of skills to be able to compete any entrance examination. The idea is to have, as far as possible, only limited examinations. Because it is a subject in the concurrent list, many state governments will not like the idea of having only one national level examination. But even so, you are aware that currently also we have national level examinations for admissions to undergraduate courses, whether if it is in engineering and so on. Idea would be, how do you weave in this idea of creating that as a common platform, irrespective of whether the student is going to join a government institution or a government aided institution or a private institution. Now, the new body that we are going to create, the HECI, along with the National Higher Education Regulatory Council, if this bill is brought about fast, and then you have a very clear-cut guideline as to this is how the NEP will be implemented, then that will become a reality. Until that does not happen, the current system will continue as it is. But ideally, the policy wanted that it should have less number of entrance examinations and not institution-specific entrance examinations. It should be as far as possible all India, but there can be state level. But it should be common to whether it is admission to a public institution or a private. It should be common. This is what the policy says. Now, how it will actually get implemented, we need to wait and see, depending upon the CAPE meeting where Government of India and states will sit and discuss it together, as well as the creation of the Higher Education Commission of India and the expanded role that we want the National Testing Agency or the NTA to play. And NTA is already doing it. You are aware of it. Then Tamil Nadu itself has asked for more quota under the NEET. So these are the micro level issues which will have to be thrashed out whenever they are working out the NEP implementation strategy for admissions to the undergraduate programs in higher education. But these will be taken, there will be a call taken on these. We will have to wait for maybe another 6 months to know the clarity with which this is being implemented.
Thank you, madam. A question from the participant Kavita. And this new education policy is how to help the implementation of Right to Education Act 2009, RTE Act 2009.
Okay. The RT Act 2009 itself will be subjected to a review under the NEP 2020. You see, we are talking about a new curricular structure from age 3 to age 18. Currently, RTE makes the right to free and compulsory education between the ages of 6 to 14. This itself is not being implemented in its totality because of the lack of resources. We could not say that we want to extend RTE from age 3 to 18 because it means that the kind of financial resources that would be called for both from the Government of India and the state governments would be of a very enormous nature, which we cannot commit to at the moment. But the RT Act will have to be reviewed for multiple reasons. One is because we have said alternate forms of schooling, including homeschooling. I don't know if many of you have read this book of Paulo Freire, Deschooling the Child. And that idea that children actually go into a structured schooling system, which has led to this anachronism that we know, led to this oxymoron that we call that the fish cannot climb a tree. That is not what fishes are meant for. But we are attempting in our schooling system to make a fish climb a tree. And that is why we have failed, because you can never make a fish climb a tree. The RT Act itself will have to be reviewed because of the way we have talked about the definition of a school in RT Act and bring about the idea of open schooling and homeschooling and so on, as well as the way in which the flexibility in the curricular structures with multilingualism and so on, with the change in assessment patterns, all this will necessitate a review of the RT Act, including the fact that under equity and inclusion, we have talked about setting up of special education zones and a gender inclusion fund and so on. So the RT Act, we have not really said that explicitly, but will have to be reviewed because of the changes that we are contemplating in the school education.
Okay, thank you, madam. Thank you very much. We are moving towards quantity to quality, output to outcome. So in this aspect, Dr. P. Suresh Kumar raised one question. Madam, can you please say one line sentence representation of our NEP outcome expectation? What is the outcome expectation of NEP? This is the question posted in the chat box. NEP outcome expectation.
The outcome expectation is that students should have the knowledge, skills, and capacities meant for the 21st century. The teachers should be empowered to drive that change, and higher education institutions should be autonomous to make this kind of a change that is taking place. That is how the NEP is.
Thank you. Thank you. Jolie Roseland Silva posted on regarding the salary system of self-finance colleges, about the salary system.
That's not a policy matter, please. That's not a policy matter. Salaries and promotion channel, how is the API score calculated? These are not policy matters. Policies will only outline that it should be enabling to have appropriate salaries, which is what we have written over there also. But we will not stipulate what is the salary structure. That is not a policy question.
Thank you, madam. Thank you. Over to Devalakshmi, madam.
Yes, sir. Thank you, ma'am, for your eye-opening session, and hope many would have got a brief knowledge about NEP 2020. And now I would like to welcome Sita Lakshmi madam to deliver the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Deepalakshmi madam. Respected and most distinguished chief guest of the day, Dr. Shakila T Shamsu. Respected our chairman, P.R. Venkatramaraja, respected principal, Dr. Ganeshan, our respected vice principal, Rajakarnakarnas, and beloved HODs, honorable professors, and my dear friends. It seems to be a great honor to propose the vote of thanks to all who have helped us in making this webinar a very resounding event. First of all, I would like to give my hearty thanks to our renowned chief guest, Dr. Shakila T Shamsu, for gracing today's webinar. Thank you, madam, for your very thoughtful, provoking, and interesting address on the need for a national education policy, NEP, and reform in NEP 2020. Once again, I thank you, ma'am, for accepting our invitation. Ma'am, given your clear details about your NEP from chapter 1st to 24, from Anganwadi to chapter 24, new education policy, online learning and online training, online educations, to each and every chapters you are given clear details about, we have clear about your speech, ma'am. Thank you once again, ma'am. I would like to thank Dr. Ganesh Ram, NIT Delhi, from his support. Thank you, sir. I would like to thank our beloved chairman, Mr. P.R. Venkatramaraja, for awakening the patient and desire to support us and to reach the pole of success. Your constant encouragement has helped us in the best way. Thank to you, sir. I would like to express our deep gratitude to the principal, Dr. L. Ganeshan, for providing constant encouragement and support. Thank you, sir. I am very grateful to our vice principal, Dr. S. Rajakarnakaran, for motivating and giving us an opportunity to the organizing this event. Thank you, sir. Our conveners, Dr. K.S. Kannan and Dr. Suresh, giving moral support and each and every step guidance for us. Thank you very much, sir. I did also thank our beloved HODs of all the department for their guidance and moral support. I am happy to express a vote of thanks to our professor, Dr. Sivakumar, and Dr. Tiruramanathan and Mr. Kannan for the technical support. Thank you very much, sir, and other members, staffs that has made this webinar a grand success through their motivations and dedications. We are happy to inform that participations from Ahmedabad, Andhra Pradesh, Bihar, Haryana, Karnataka, Kerala, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, Odisha, Pondicherry, Uttar Pradesh, and Tamil Nadu, various participations. Apart from India, Philippines also, so many participated. Happy to share this one. Thank you, one and all. Finally, I thank the audience who have turned up in such a great numbers from various organizations. Thank you so much for your cooperation. Once again, I thank all for your cordial cooperation. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you once again.
Thank you,
And I'm
Shakila.
happy that you acknowledged Dr. Ganesh Ram. Had it not been for him, maybe I would not have been speaking in Ramco Institute of Technology. So I am grateful to Ganesh Ram also for having actually made my introduction to you, Dr. Shita Lakshmi, and to the entire team of the Ramco Institute of Technology. Thank you.
Thank you, Shakila ma'am, for spending your valuable time with us and sharing your knowledge. And we expect more in future also to involve with you, ma'am. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you.
Dear participants, the feedback link has been posted in the chat box and also in the YouTube link. Kindly register your feedback and get your e-certificate. Thank you.